Good evening, everyone. Glad you're here on this beautiful Wednesday evening. I hope everybody's had a great day. We come to church just a few weeks ago freezing to death, and now we come with short sleeves on. So I think I like it better like this, and so it makes everybody have a bigger smile and feel better. Of course, I'm not Steve Granger. My name is Terry Adams. Brother Steve is preaching a funeral right now as we speak, so we need to pray for him and that family, those families of that lost that young lady. And so pray for him and the family as they go through this time of bereavement. Also, before I forget, there's no services, no Wednesday night services next week. It's spring break, and Brother Steve said they would not have services next Sunday, next Wednesday. So there's a lot of people be out of town with their families and stuff, so he's just going to skip it next week. So just keep that in mind. So if you show up here, you'll be the only one here, okay? All righty.
We could go on spring break.
Yeah, go on spring break. Go somewhere. My spring break used to be 2 days there for many years. I finally got we called it junior high, middle school, and they started having a spring break. But they get all kind of breaks now. But that's right. We got a lot to cover tonight. Before we get started, let's have a word of prayer, and then we'll get going here. Lord, thank you for this time to get together with you and your people, Father. We thank you for everyone that's here tonight. I want to pray a special prayer, Lord, for the families and the funerals going on right now. Be with Brother Steve as he speaks. Comfort that family, Lord, and draw them close to you. And Lord, now I pray you'll be with me. Help me to get my thoughts together and present this lesson, God, in the way you want me to. Lord, we love you and we praise you. For it's your name we pray. Amen. Now we're going to continue on in 1 Samuel. If you got my little outline thing here. Brother Steve said he only got through 11 verses last week. So we're going to begin in 1 Samuel chapter 17, verse 12. I'm just going to kind of go over 12 through 16 without really getting into them real hot and heavy. But it's 4 sons of Jesse and the giant. You find out something there in verse 13. You find out what's going to happen to Jesse's 3 oldest sons. What have they done? Verse 13. Gone to war. I know some of y'all men in here are veterans. But I know it's a hard thing to see one of your sons go off to war, much less 3. So 3 of his sons, and I'm going to let y'all pronounce their names. Who are they? Okay, who else? Y'all did good. Yeah, good. I tell you, you'll find, I'm so glad that he named David, because I don't have a problem with that one. Now, the 3 oldest went off to war, and I want you to know something else, that it said that that Jesse was up in age. He was advanced in the years. So, and he also said he had 8 sons. 3 oldest gone off to, we just named. The youngest one, David, we know quite a bit. We've already talked about David. He was there, and it says in verse 15 that he returned from Saul. What did he do for Saul? What was his job at this time? And what else did he do? Played music to comfort Saul when Saul would get mad and upset and all that stuff. So it says he returned from Saul occasionally to take care of what? The sheep, his daddy's sheep, didn't he? And then verse 16 is interesting. Who are they talking about there? Goliath. What did he do? It says 40 days and 40 nights. What did he do? Taunted the people, didn't he? And we'll see more about that as we get more into the lesson. So let's look. We're going to look at verses 17 through 30. David visits his brothers and speaks to the army. Let's look in verse 17. Then Jesse said to his son David, "Take now for your brothers an ephah of this dried grain and these 10 loaves, and run to your brother." Ephah means a half a bushel. I looked that up. So he's going to take a half a bushel of dried grain, 10 loaves of bread, And do what? He's going to take them to your brothers at the camp. And carry these 10 cheeses to the captain of their 1,000 and see how your brothers fare and bring back news of them. You know, you notice something there. Don't matter how old your kids get, you still care for them, don't you? You still love them. Most of us in this room have grown kids now. Many of us in here have grandchildren. But you never quit being a daddy, and you never quit being a mama for sure, do you? And the son, even though it said, remember the dad, Jesse, they said he was up in age, and his sons were old enough to go off to war. He called his youngest, and he wanted to make sure they had something to eat. But also, I think the main reason, he wanted to find out how they were doing. He was too old to travel, too old to go to where they were. But he wanted his David. What did he tell him to do? You come back and tell me how they are doing. So many of y'all might have kids that live out of town or away somewhere. You keep tabs with them, don't you? You can't see them every day, but you want to know how they're doing. You call them, or you Facebook or FaceTime or whatever now, and you keep up with them. So Jesse sent David to take food and to check on his brothers. Now Saul, in verse 19, now Saul and they and all of the men in Israel were in the valley of Elon fighting with the Philistines. Look at verse 20. So David rose early in the morning, left the sheep with a keeper. Remember, David was a very good shepherd. He made sure they say that good shepherds knew each sheep by their name. Now, I don't know, all sheep look alike to me. I don't know the difference between one and the other. But David made sure his sheep were taken care of and took the things, went as Jesse had commanded him. And he came to the camp as the army was going out to the fight and shouting for the battle. Can you imagine? We've seen it in movies, and maybe some of you guys that were veterans have been involved in that. You're fixing to go out and fight an enemy. You're not going to a dance. You're not going to a party. You're not going to the beach. You're going out to battle. And these guys, it's kind of like a football team before they enter the field. They're all excited and hollering and going on, but they're scared too. So David arrives, and they're getting ready. They're hollering and shouting and encourage one another. Verse 21. For Israel and the Philistines had drawn up in battle array, army against army. So not only were the Israelites there, the Philistines were there as well. And David left the supplies in the hand of the supply keeper, ran to the army, and came and greeted his brothers. We're going to see more about the brother, especially one of them here in just a minute, but we'll go back on this. Verse 23. Then as he talked with them, there was a champion. Who was it? So keep that word champion in your mind. Again, we'll hit on that again. Goliath by name, coming up from the army of the Philistines, and he spoke according to the same words. And David heard them. What does that mean? Spoke of the same words? What do you think that's talking about there?
Could he have been daring him to come up that hill?
I do think it was in the same language they could understand it. But what did he do? What did brothers? I noticed last week in the first verses there. Remember, he started taunting them. He started challenging them, belittling them. And see, David was out with the sheep. He didn't know this was going on, but now he sees what kind of person this giant is. I mean, I'm not very tall. I'm not short, but I'm not very tall. I'm probably average height. My Corky Coker, the man I work for, his daughter married a guy that's 6'9". That's a giant, but nothing compared. I know y'all went over it last week how big Goliath was. So he was a big man and had a big mouth and had a big ego, didn't he? Thought he could whoop the world. So it says he was still talking the same language and trying to scare him and trying to intimidate him. And pretty much in verse 24, he was doing exactly what he set out to do. It says, and all the men of Israel. And who were they? Who were these men? The army. Supposed to be brave. Supposed to be ready to go. When they saw the man, what did they do? They retreated back a ways, didn't they? Yeah. They were afraid of him. I never was much of a fighter myself. I mean, I don't consider myself a coward, but I never was one to fight. But I knew guys at school that just loved to fight. They would love to intimidate, love to just cause trouble. But what I found out later on in life, a lot of times when you stood up to them, they wasn't as brave as they tried to make you think they were. But it said the army, they fled from him and were dreadfully afraid. Verse 25. Listen to this. So the men of Israel said, have you seen this man who has come up? Surely he has come up to defy Israel. And it shall be that the man who kills him, the king will enrich with great riches, will give him his daughter, and give him his father's house, exempt from what? If I couldn't get anything else out of that, I'd go for him to try to get out of taxes. I just filed mine, and again, I got to pay Uncle Sam again this year. Do what? That's right. Send him up here. Then David heard what they were saying. Remember now, he's not been to the camp. He's went up there to take the goods that his father, the food to his brothers, to meet his brothers and do what his daddy told him to do. He didn't really know the situation. So David spoke to the men, the army who stood by him, saying, what shall be done for the man who kills a Philistine and takes away the reproach from Israel? For who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God? I'm going to tell you something. I don't think he said, he already heard what the guy that killed him was going to get, but I think what he's trying to do is to make them look how silly and how, they're supposed to be an army, it's supposed to be brave, and here you have this young teenager, David. He don't like what's taking place. He says, all y'all are worried about and all you're concerned about is how much a bounty the person that kills him can get. And none of y'all are going to step to the plate. You want somebody else to do it. And so he goes on. Then David spoke to the men who stood by him, saying, again, what shall be done for the man who killed a Philistine and takes away the reproach from him? Where is it? Okay, I've already read that, okay. No, I haven't. For who is the uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God? Verse 27, and the people answered him in this matter, saying, so shall it be done for the man who kills him. Kind of a rhetorical question, wasn't it? There's hundreds, maybe thousands of men there. And he said, well, maybe this one group will have a different answer. But they didn't, because it says in verse 28, or verse 27, it said, in other words, you already heard what's going to happen. David was trying just to challenge them. He was trying to make them come to their senses. Now look in verse 28. What happened here? Jealousy. Now, Eliab, is that how you say that, his name? How you say his name? Eliab. His oldest brother heard when he spoke to the man, and his anger was aroused against David. And he said, why did you come down here? And with whom have you left these few sheep in the wilderness? I know your pride and the insolence of your heart. Insolence means, I looked that up, that means bitterness or it means rudeness, unforgiving, prideful. For you have come down to see the battle. Now, how did David fit into the pecking order with his brothers? I was the youngest of four. Not only, I got a lot in common with David. I was not only the youngest one. What else did they say David was? What did he look like? What did they describe him as? Good looking. So yeah, I was. Yeah. What out too, ain't bad. I never kept sheep, but I did sack groceries when I was growing up. But it says his brother's mad at him. And brothers and sisters, I never had a sister, but brothers, I know, you don't always get along. You love each other, and very seldom do you harm one another. You might get in a fight or especially holler at one another. So I'm sure that David being the youngest, he had been kind of put down by his brothers anyway. And when Eliab heard him talking to these other soldiers, it made him mad. He thought he was doing it to bring attention to himself. But we'll find out as we get more into the lesson that wasn't David's attempt at all.
Terry, too, I guess, I understand that shepherding was kind of not looked upon as a very
Exactly.
high-profile job, I might say.
Ah.
So it's like, what are you doing coming here? You're a shepherd, you're not a warrior.
As we'll find out some more, too, he was probably, I think, 16, 17 maybe? A lot of times you don't get respect, and rightly so in a lot of cases, because if you remember back, I can't barely remember back when I was 16 or 17. I'll be 70 Saturday, by the way. But sometimes you think you know more than you really do. But David was a different person. And just because you're young, sometimes we as older people need to kind of listen to what they're saying and be more understanding. So his brother put him down. Get out of here. What did you do? Did you go off and leave the sheep unattended? And as we already know, he left him with a keeper before he left the sheep. And he was there because his daddy sent him there. He didn't go there just to bring. And when he got there, he didn't like what he said, what he saw. And David was one never to keep his mouth shut. He stated what he saw, and he didn't like what was taking place. Let's look on that verse 29. And David says, "What have I done now?" No, that ain't what he said. What have I done now? I don't know how many times I had to say that to my brothers. Why don't you leave me alone? What have I done? What have I done this time? And I remember the phrase I used to always tell them. You're not my daddy. You don't tell me what to do. And David is saying, what have I done this time? He says, is there not a cause? And then David turned from him towards another and said the same thing and got the same answer. So you see, David was being bold. He was irritated because the army was so scared of Goliath. And he didn't like what was taking place. He felt like they should be man up about it and go to battle and defeat the enemy instead of running from this enemy. Now the next part, we're going to look in verses 31 through 40. David meets with Saul. Verse 31, now when the words which David spoke were heard, they reported them to Saul, and he sent for him. Verse 31, then David said to Saul, let no man's heart fail because of him. Your servant will go and fight with the Philistine. What is David telling him right there?
Take care of the problem.
Yeah, your servant. He's talking about himself, isn't he? You know, if nobody else will do it, I'll do it. I'm not scared of you. What does Saul say? Look at verse 3. Yes.
Hadn't there been a lot of days they've been coming out, listening to him bully up and stuff? It's what they were like on two different mountains. And it was like nobody wanted to attack the other, even though the giants could have. But they stayed up on the mountain hoping, I guess, that the Israelites would come up and they could, have an unfair advantage over somebody coming up the hill. It's easier to go, fight going downhill than it is coming up the hill.
The Israelites were afraid of the bully.
Yeah,
And
plus,
the Philistines were using the bully.
but he was in a strategic ground.
Right, exactly.
I,
Yeah. I know it's at least 40 days because it says in verse 16 they've been doing it for at least 40 days.
somebody to blink one side or the other so they could, but I don't think the Israelites wanted them to attack, but I think they were wanting the Israelites to attack. Because they'd be coming up a hill and they probably didn't need an unfair advantage, but that would have given them an advantage, I don't know if it's all unfair. It would have been an advantage if somebody's attacking you from below.
Exactly. Now let's look on. David tells him, send me. And look what Saul told him. And David had heard this from other people, from his brothers, from his family. And Saul said to David, you're not able to go against this Philistine to fight with him, for you are a what? You're a kid. and he is a man of war from his youth. In other words, David, you've never done any fighting. You've cared for the sheep. You've been out where nobody can see you. You're just taking care of the sheep, which a lot of people do. But this guy, he was trained. He's big and he's tough and he's mean. He's been trained to be a professional soldier. Look what David said. David's getting up to here with this. He's getting madder by the moment. But David said to Saul, your servants used to keep his father's sheep. It's me. And when a lion or bear came and took a lamb out of the flock, I went after it and struck it and delivered the lamb from its mouth. And when it arose against me, I caught it by the beard and struck and killed it. Your servant has killed both lion and bear, and this uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, seeing he has defiled the armies of the living God. Moreover, David said, the Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and from the paw of the bear, he will do what? And Saul said to David, what? You get out of here. I don't need you. You're too young. Go, and the Lord be with you. You see, David stated his case, and Saul believed what he was saying. Even though he started out saying, you're too young, you don't know what you're doing. But he said, hey, listen, don't tell me that I don't know what I'm doing. I've killed a lion, I've killed a bear. With God's help. Look at verse 38. And I think the next three verses here are kind of funny to me. So Saul said, okay, you're going to need some stuff to wear if you're going to battle. So he clothed him with his armor. Now, how did they describe Saul when he was chosen to be the king? How did they describe him? He's a big guy. Yeah. David was probably, I don't know, it don't say if David was shorter, but he wasn't real tall. So, first of all, the armor is going to be too big for him. As you can see in verse 38. He put a bronze helmet on his head. It was probably way too big. I also clothed him with a coat of mail. I didn't know what that was. I looked it up. It's kind of like a jacket of brass, kind of like extra protection, kind of like maybe a bulletproof vest or whatever. It's another coat of armor there. Look at verse 39. David fastened his sword to his armor and tried to walk. And what happened? Have you ever been top heavy? That's when I got my stomach kind of, I don't want to be top heavy. It kind of balances out how I walk. But David said, I cannot walk. I told Saul, I can't walk with these things, for I've not tested them. So what did David do? Took all that stuff off. And he fastened his sword to his armor and tried to walk, for he had not tested them. And David said to Saul, I cannot walk these, for I have not tested them. So David took them off. In verse 40, then he took his staff in his hand, and he chose for himself what? Why did he choose 5? Do what? Yeah, he didn't know. As we all know, we'll find out, he only took one shot to get him, didn't it? But he chose 5. 5 smooth stones from the brook, and put them in a shepherd's bag and a pouch which he had, and his sling was in his hand, and he drew near to the Philistine. If you was going up against a giant, or any kind of enemy, I think one of the secrets is to be the best prepared, with all the best equipment. And I think that's one thing the United States learned in World War II. We had to have the equipment, and everybody went to work. The factories were turned into making tanks and guns and jeeps, and ammunition was made, and we supplied ourselves, and we overwhelmed Germany and Japan with all not only the will to fight, but also the equipment and ammunition and the supplies we needed to battle in war. And David goes up against an enemy with what? A slingshot and what? 5 stones. Okay. That don't make a lot of sense, but we'll find out. Now we're going to look in verses 41 through 47. David meets Goliath. So the Philistine came and began drawing near to David, and the man who bore the shield went before him. In other words, he kind of helped him protect, even helped the giant needed a little help there. And when the Philistine looked about and saw David, what did he start doing? Started laughing. He said, he distrained him, for he was only a youth, ruddy and good looking. So the Philistine said to David, am I a dog that you come to me with sticks? And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. You know, there again, a bully, a person that tries to take control, a lot of times they use it with their mouth. They try to bull you down. They try to disgrade you and dishonor you by how they talk. So not only did he make fun of him, he started cursing him as well. Look what he says. And the Philistine said to David, Goliath, it's who's talking, come to me, and I will give you your flesh to the birds of the air and the beast of the field. Did David hightail it and take off? Let's find out what he did. Verse 45. Then David said to the Philistine, you come to me with a sword, with a spear, and with a javelin. But I come to you what? The God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defiled. This day the Lord, look at this. He didn't quit there. He says, this day the Lord will deliver you into my hand, and I will strike you and take your head from you. And this day I will give you the carcasses of the camp of the Philistines, or the bodies, or the leftovers to the birds of the air and the wild beasts of the earth, and that all the earth may know that there is a David in the world. Capital G. There's a God in Israel. Verse 47. Then all this assembly shall know that David does not save with, that the Lord does not save with sword and spear. For the battle is whose? And he will give you into our hands. You know, I've taught David and Goliath. I heard that preached to me. I heard it taught to me. I've taught it in Sunday school before. But you know something? I've heard it taught in different ways. Everybody's going to face giants in their lives. You're going to have giant problems in your life. You're going to have people that don't like you in your life. But you know what I get out of this right here? David said, where we mess up is that we try to fight the giants in our life by ourselves. We don't turn them over to God. Even as Christians, and many of us in this room have been Christians all of our life, or most of our lives, a long time. And we talk big, but when we get into a problem, the first thing, especially us men, try to do is take care of ourselves. And even though we end up turning them back over to God most of the time, we make that mistake. We think that we can handle all the problems that we face in life. And what David's saying, he said, Goliath, I don't need a sword. I don't need a spear. I don't need all that stuff you've got. He said, the Lord's going to provide me with victory. And not only he's going to provide me with victory, he's going to destroy you. And you know, I think today in this country we live in, our young people, who are their heroes? Who is their champion? Who is their Goliath? Pop stars, movie stars, sports figures. You know, they think it's beneath them to come to church and pray and to cry and to praise God, but he tells us right here, and it's still true today. And we as Christians are not doing the job we need to do. We need to let unchurched people, especially young people, David's a teenager. Hey guys, there's more to life than shooting a basketball or singing a song or being in a movie. And so many times, and there's nothing wrong with that. Don't get me wrong, I love sports. And I go to movies, and I watch too much TV. But sometimes the world and our youth forget that he's supposed to be number one, and all this other stuff's supposed to be number two. Now we're going to look at verse 48 through 54. Goliath gets stoned, and loses his head. Goliath gets stoned and loses his head. So it was when the Philistine arose and came and drew near to meet David, that David hurried and ran towards the army, not against, running away, like he had met when he first went to camp to meet his brothers and all were afraid. He said he ran towards the army and towards who? Goliath. Then David put his hand in his bag. He took out a stone and he slung it and missed. No, sir. He struck the Philistine in his forehead so that the stone sank into his forehead and he fell on his face to the earth. Now look here, verse 50. So David prevailed over the Philistine with a sling and a stone and struck the Philistine and killed him. But David didn't have a sword. Remember? There's no sword. It's one of the things he had promised he was going to do. Verse 51. Therefore David ran and stood over the Philistine, and what did he do? He took the giant sword from him. He's laying there. I don't know if he's dead at this time. He said he slew him, so he probably was, but he took his sword from this big guy and killed him. And then he cut his head off. Well, he meant business, didn't he? He finished the job. He told him, he said, because the giant said, I'll make you, said, you ain't going to be nothing time I get through with you. It was the other way around, wasn't it? David not only killed him, but he cut his head off. And look, what did his followers do? Well, the Philistines saw that their champion was dead. What did they do? They run like cowards, didn't they? I think Darrell kind of hit on that a while ago. You know, they could have attacked earlier too, but I think they were dependent on Goliath to do it. They didn't want to fight either. They thought that Goliath could take care of everything. And so many times in life, we think other people can take care of us, and they do help us. But it boils down, folks, we've got to turn all of our problems, all of our issues in our life over to Him, who will take care and finish off any trouble that we have. Now the men of Israel and Judea arose and shouted, persuaded and pursued the Philistines all the way out of the country. It says went to the gates there of the Yukon, and the wounded of the Philistines fell along the road to Shermama, even as far as Gath and Ekron. Then the children of Israel returned from chasing Philistines, and did they praise God and bow down and thank Him for victory? What does it say they did in verse 53? They were selfish, wasn't they? You know, so many times when God blesses us, folks, we forget. When you're in a hospital bed looking up, you ask Him to heal you. And many times He does. Sometimes He chooses not. But when He does, we'll say, God, I'm going to serve You. If You'll get me out of this hospital bed, Lord, if You'll restore my health, I'll serve You. What happens to a lot of people? They forget, don't they? They forget. Do what? They renege on their deal. Well, that's exactly right. And you know, folks, the Philistines were brave and strong as long as they had a brave and strong God leading them. And you know, we carry the title Christians, don't we? Who's our leader? You know, the word Christian, if you take Christ out of it, have you got a word? If you take Christ out of your life, we don't have a life either. And you see, the Philistines fled. And the Israelites, instead of bowing down and thanking God for saving them again, they went and got all the good stuff out of the tents and got all the stuff, clothes and food and everything they could get. But it says in verse 54, and David took the head of the Philistine and brought it to Jerusalem, but he put his armor in his tent. Now, we're going to the last part real quickly. David meets Saul again, verses 55 through 58. Kind of interesting to me. When Saul saw David going out again, going out against the Philistine, he said to Abner, the commander of the army, Abner, whose son is this youth? What did Abner say? Well, God be my helper. I have no idea who he is. So you got a young man that's went out there and just saved the country, saved them, and they're wondering, who is this guy's daddy? So the king said, inquire whose son this young man is. Verse 57. Then as David returned from the slaughter of the Philistine, Abner took him and brought him before Saul. And what was Saul carrying? Has anybody ever approached any of you guys holding the head of somebody in their hand? he was gonna hold that head for a while, wasn't he? He said he's holding the head of the Philistine in his hand. And Saul said to him, whose son are you, young man? And what did David say? Had Saul ever met Jesse? I remember earlier when Brother Steve was talking, he met him, didn't he? And didn't even realize, even though David was in, we talked before, he was there, armor bearer, and also played music. He really didn't know David. But boy, he knows who he is now. And you'll find out later on as we go on. He will really know who David is. Any comments? Yeah.
Jerry, one thing, the things hit me is how he was making fun of not only David, because David was a lot smaller than he is. A big guy making fun of a little guy, we've seen that throughout the years, but he made fun of his God.
Yeah.
That's not wise. Not if it's a real God.
Historians believe that Saul's armor weighed about 125 pounds.
I'm glad David didn't wear it. He could have got his sling back, could he? He didn't need it.
Jerry, wonder what happened to the armor bearer?
I bet he hid behind a bush and watched it. Yeah, I bet he did.
This last verse is kind of funny. Yes, David, whose son are you? David said, I am the son of your
Your servant Jesse the Bethlehemite, and your replacement.
Yeah. His brother Steve will do a lot better than I. As Brother Steve will do a lot better job than I could do. We'll find out. He gets to know him very well.
Throughout the Bible, and I think Brother Steve said this today, throughout the Bible, God always uses the person you least expect, and the people around him least expected at the time, to do great things for his kingdom. He just continues to use people that you wouldn't normally think he would use for stuff. He just continues to, no matter who you are in this world, you should have hope that, I don't care which part, you're not well being able to be used by God if he so chooses to, and you accept that. It's just, you feel like to do that, because God.
See, David was anointed. And, you don't usually mention that during this scene here. But the confidence that he was given was he had already been anointed. Had been told what it was for, but he was in favor. So that had everything to do with his confidence and being able to take the life
And he believed in it.
because of the anointing.
He believed it too. It's awesome.
Like I said, and then look at the Lord has already delivered from the bear and the lion. What's one more obstacle? You got the Lord on your side, it's faith.
The caricatures and drawings we have all seen of this event really don't do it justice. It shows a little pouch and more like pebbles. But as you read about it, these stones were really bigger than a baseball, and most of them weighed a pound or more. And as I've read here and back in Judges, marksmen with the slingshot could make that stone go up 90 to 100 miles an hour. And so David was quite the marksman and knew what to do, and it was a true weapon then. So I mean, you watch a baseball player get hit by a pitcher throwing 100 miles an hour, and know what it can knock him cold. And so this wasn't any just little pebble that he picked up out of the creek. This was a true, when you think about something bigger than baseball,
You don't have to be now.
and coming at you at 100 miles an hour.
You don't have to be very close to him either, when it's traveling like that.
Well, and to get to that speed, you probably, I don't know how far away, it doesn't say how far away he was. But, you know, had to be enough distance for that to pick up speed enough. And Goliath probably wasn't very agile either. He probably couldn't, duck and dive, out of the way, so.
But in closing, even though we face problems in life, we need to make sure we let God fight our battles and we're willing to do what God asks us to do. One thing when you're young, when I first got saved, I wanted everybody around me to know what had happened to me. I mean, I would tell everybody. And as we get older, it seems like sometimes we're not as bold as young people. We're not as apt to step forward. And let's never get lazy and never get inactive on God, because God can use us, and He wants to if we'll let Him. Thank you, folks, for joining in tonight. I appreciate the ones that are here and the ones that are online. And thank you for letting me teach. And the good news is, in 2 weeks, not next week, 2 weeks, Brother Steve will be back. You don't have to look at me or hear me, okay? Thank you. Brother John.